A pilgrim from the east extinguished a fire in a monastery and was branded a heretic. The flames were already licking at the roof of the scriptorium, and water was gurgling in a dark well, raised by a strange wooden contraption with straps and leather bags. The books were smoking, the bell was ringing frequently, people were rushing about, and the stranger turned the handle and gestured for buckets to be passed to him. The flames weakened, the roof sagged, but did not collapse. In the morning, the monastery courtyard was met with silence, soot, and whispers of sin and prohibition. Hello? Tell me where you're watching this video from. Write about it in the comments. Enjoy listening. The monastery stood on a trade route between a gentle hill and a river meadow. On ordinary days, it smelled of bread, resin, herbs, and book dust. On that day, a cart with barrels sealed with wax rolled up to the gate. The driver told the gatekeeper that he was bringing wax and oil for the holiday. The gatekeeper nodded, made a note, and let him pass. In the kitchen, a young assistant cook, a boy with a sharp face, noticed a stronger than usual smell of resin. He told his senior that wax did not smell like that. The senior grumbled that wax comes in different varieties and ordered the barrels to be taken to the warehouse. In the evening, the wind fluttered the banners above the gate, the monks finished their work, and the librarian folded the sheets with unfinished lines. A pilgrim, thin, tanned, with a travel bag and a scroll, asked for lodging. He said he was coming from the eastern roads, looking for old manuscripts in places where strangers were not persecuted for their different customs. He was allowed into the guest courtyard. He sat down by the well, looked at the rim, touched the chain, and quietly examined the ropes. In his hands he held a small wooden frame, straps, a pair of leather bags, and a forged handle. At night, when the candles went out, and only the lamps flickered by the icons, there was a crack in the darkness. At first it was quiet, as if someone had scraped dry bark with a knife. Then a flash appeared in the window of the scriptorium, and the flames shot up. The bell ringer, a stooped old man, noticed the glow. He pulled the rope and sounded the alarm. The monks ran, but the water in the barrels seemed like a drop in the fire. The pilgrim stood by the well and quickly assembled his collapsible mechanism. He secured the frame to the rim, tightened the straps, inserted the leather bags, and screwed on the handle. He gestured with his hands, where to stand, how to turn, how to carry the buckets. The water flowed more evenly and quickly. People pulled it in a chain to the scriptorium. The smoke stung their eyes. The roof creaked, but the fire was dying down. The old bell ringer did not leave the bell and set the rhythm. A short strike, a long one, a short one. The buckets flew like grain in a sieve. By dawn, the fire had died down. The beams were charred, the walls blackened, but the stone vault held, and the books, which had been taken out to the refectory beforehand, lay in tight stacks and slowly cooled. The pilgrim lowered his hands. The leather bags were still dripping. The water in the well rushed as if it couldn't believe it could stop. Around noon, a messenger arrived from the nearest town. He brought a short note from an official of the ecclesiastical court. It said that the purity of the doctrine must be preserved, that all speculation without blessing must be forbidden, and that strange guests must be watched closely. The words fell on ground of fatigue and fear. By evening, whispers spread through the corridors that the stranger had performed a forbidden act, and thus violated the order that water should not flow so quickly unless God commanded it, and that the fire had stopped too abruptly, which meant there was some trickery involved. The pilgrim asked to meet with the librarian. The gray-haired keeper of books received him in a small cell, where the walls were covered with notes and markings. The pilgrim showed him a scroll, with drawings of old wheels and descriptions of hand pumps. He said that this was ancient knowledge, forgotten and simple, that it was not against faith because it was meant to save books and people. The librarian held the scroll up to the light, looked closely, and noticed familiar patterns he knew from old collections. He said he would show it to the abbot. The abbot, however, was already busy with other matters. He had to count losses, issue orders, collect donations, and receive a strange guest who had brought barrels. The same cart driver showed up again. He told the guard that the barrels had to be returned empty, otherwise the owner would be angry. The guard replied that the barrels were still in the farmyard, being counted, and asked him to come back tomorrow. The cart driver left, but he looked at the walls too long and too often, as if searching for weak spots. The boy from the kitchen noticed this and went around, as if looking for a splinter he had not brought to the stove. He saw footprints smeared with soot in the grass under the window. The footprints gave off a smell of resin. The boy remembered that the barrels smelled too strong and decided to tell the librarian about it. The librarian listened, then called the steward, who was in charge of the storerooms. The steward said that the boy had confused the resin, which was stored separately, with the barrels, which contained pure wax and fragrant oil. The boy did not argue, but in the evening he looked into the barn. At the bottom of one of the barrels he found a hardened piece of dark resin with golden veins. He took out a splinter and hid it in his sleeve. In the morning, he brought it to the librarian. The librarian heated the piece over charcoal, and the resin burned with an even flame that lasted a long time. The librarian said it was not wax. He took the find to the abbot. The abbot listened, but nodded as one nods when thinking about something else. He was busy with visitors. A detachment with the coat of arms of the baron's steward arrived at the monastery. The steward said through his bailiffs that he was ready to help with the repairs, but asked for access to the archives to redraw the boundaries. He explained that fires often hide old mistakes, so it was better to put things in order. The abbot hesitated. The librarian tensed up. The archives contained confirmations of the village's rights to the river, forest, and mill. If the boundaries were redrawn as the steward wanted, the villages would lose their water and forest, and the monastery would lose its income. The librarian went to the Pilgrim and asked him to wait 2 days and not leave. He said he wanted to show the scroll to those who understood old books. While they were talking, the old bell ringer brought a small bag from his storeroom. In the bag was a short ribbon with a simple pattern, faded but stubborn. The old man said that many years ago a woman with a baby had spent the night at the monastery gate. She had asked for shelter and bread. He had given her what he could, and in return the woman had given him the ribbon and asked him to remember the sign if fate brought the baby back. The bell ringer said that the pattern on the pilgrim's ribbon was similar. The pilgrim took a similar ribbon out of his bag, only it was burnt round the edges and torn. The patterns matched at the edges. The old man lowered his eyes, said that the world was small, and told him to wait for a sign, because one thread rarely comes alone. The next day, a woman rode up to the gate on a good pack-horse with a couple of assistants. She was known in the market as the widow of a merchant who kept warehouses by the bridge. She asked the abbot to receive her, told the gatekeeper that she had brought oil and flour as gifts, and also bales of cloth for the poor. She was let in. The widow told the abbot that the monastery had often given shelter to travelers and orphans, and she wanted to help after the fire. The abbot thanked her and told her to sign the book. The librarian, seeing the widow, stepped closer. She was holding the same ribbon in her hands. He asked her where she was from. The widow said that many years ago she had to leave her baby with nomads for a while and then search for him in markets and fairs. She remembered the mark on the ribbon she had given the bell ringer for bread. The pilgrim stood aside, not daring to speak. The librarian described the pattern on the second ribbon to the widow and said that the pilgrim had the other half. The widow looked, put the ribbons together, and realized that the pattern was the same. She was trembling, but she pulled herself together. She said she would talk about business later, but now she asked for time to sort out her heart. The librarian nodded. The bell ringer clenched his hand into a fist so as not to drop the bell key. Meanwhile, the cart with the barrels returned. The driver demanded the empty containers. The guard stalled for time. He said that the inventory was not complete. The driver got angry, but left. At night, someone tried to enter the farmyard again, but hit a hanging frying pan, the clang of which echoed across the yard. A boy hiding in the hay saw a shadow, recognized the steward's gait, and heard the whisper of a second person asking him to wait until the trial, when the archive would be officially opened. In the morning, an official from the ecclesiastical court arrived. He told the abbot that he had heard about a strange device that supposedly accelerated the rise of water excessively, and that the pilgrim's faith and intentions needed to be checked. He ordered the stranger to be detained. The pilgrim did not resist. He only asked that his scroll be shown to those who could read old books. The official said that he was not opposed to book wisdom, but to arbitrariness. The librarian intervened, showed drawings from ancient manuscripts, and explained that this was not witchcraft, but a craft. The official said he would look into it, but for the sake of fairness, witnesses and verification would be required. At that moment, the widow took the parchments out of her bag. She told the abbot that the baron's steward was demanding an old toll for the bridge which had not existed in previous years, and that there were rumors in the city about a land census after the fires. She said she wanted to donate money to the monastery for roof repairs, but in return asked for a public reading of the old charters about the river and the forest. The abbot understood the hint and agreed to invite the town scribes. Meanwhile, the boy took the liberty of going to the cellarer's storeroom. He did not sneak in out of curiosity. He was looking for the truth. Among the barrels and sacks, he found a thin book with expenses. The numbers were large, the lines were even, but the amounts did not add up. The day the barrels were delivered was recorded twice, as a receipt of wax, and as an expense for resin to repair a chariot. The boy took the book to the librarian. He saw that the estimate was overstated, and that the entry for resin was disguised as wheel repair. The librarian went to the abbot. The abbot turned pale. He called an official, showed him the records, and ordered the steward to be brought in. The steward tried to justify himself, saying that the resin was suitable for repairing roofs and that this was a common practice. But the servants found the baron's manager's seal in his dwelling, and a letter in which he wrote that in the event of the loss of the archive section related to the mill, the contract would be revised. The boy told them about the nighttime whispering and the shadow. The bell ringer said that on the same night he had heard the quiet clanging of iron at the gate. He showed them marks on the wall where the plaster had recently been knocked off. The marks led to a drain where they found pieces of tar. The ecclesiastical court official listened and said that the case concerning the water device could be considered together with the arson case. He allowed the pilgrim to be taken out of the cell and ordered him to show how the mechanism worked and how it could be useful. The pilgrim calmly assembled the frame by the well, showed the leather bags and straps, and explained that the bags worked like paddles, taking water and delivering it to the top through a gutter. He said that he had seen similar things among craftsmen who study ancient records, and that he himself had copied the drawings while traveling. The librarian confirmed that similar descriptions exist in ancient collections that the monastery has kept since ancient times. The official looked at the scroll and said that there was no text in it that was contrary to the faith. In the evening, the widow came to the librarian's cell. She asked if she could say a few words the next day when people gathered. The librarian nodded. He remembered the ribbon and the long-standing knot tied by someone else's misfortune. His heart was heavy, but his thoughts were clear. Small signs lead to big outcomes if you follow them. In the morning, people gathered in the monastery courtyard. Monks, servants, peasants from nearby villages, scribes from the city, bailiffs, a widow, and the baron's steward. The abbot ordered the letters to be brought out. The librarian read aloud about the river, the mill, and the forest, about ancient treaties and common bridges. The steward frowned and said through the bailiffs that after the fire the papers could be considered suspicious. Then the widow took out a small bag, opened it, and showed everyone the ribbon, placed it against the pilgrim's ribbon, and said through the librarian that the mark was the same. People began to whisper, but the widow raised her hand to silence them. She asked the boy from the kitchen to speak. The boy stepped forward, even though he was scared. He opened the cellarer's book and showed the different amounts. He said that the resin was in barrels, that the wax smelled different, and that the resin burned longer. He put a piece of resin bark from the bottom of the barrel on the table. The ecclesiastical court official looked at the manager and the cellarer. He said that based on these signs, it looked more like arson committed with the intent of renegotiating the contracts. He ordered the cellarer to be taken to the city for questioning. The manager tried to get away scot-free, but the widow said through the librarian that she was ready to put up her warehouses as collateral so that the monastery could file a lawsuit in a public court. She said she would repay her old debts to the world that had once saved her life and given her bread. She added that her help was not a bargain, but a debt that must be called a debt. The abbot thanked her, but kept his back straight. A rumor spread through the courtyard that the pilgrim was the widow's son, lost in childhood. The widow did not make a spectacle of it, but approached him and said through the librarian that she believed it. He nodded. The bell ringer turned away and wiped his eyes with his palm. The librarian smiled quietly because the knot on the ribbon had finally been tied properly. When the noise subsided, the monastery resembled a wound that no longer bled but still hurt. The roof of the scriptorium was patched with patches, soot had eaten into the stone, and the refectory smelled of smoke. People worked steadily. The pilgrim stayed. He was in no hurry to leave because now he had a mother to whom he had to explain the path that led through markets, caravans, oyster shores, dry steps, and dusty books. He was taciturn and did not like crowds, but in quiet places he showed the boy how to repair belts and how to cut even circles out of leather for bags. The boy was a quick learner. Not only did he run faster than anyone else, he could count and notice the little things that make a big difference. The librarian told the abbot that the boy should learn to read and write properly. Meanwhile, the ecclesiastical court official recorded the testimony, checked the scrolls, saw that the description of the mechanism was found in old collections, and told the abbot that the charges of heresy were dropped because it was a useful craft and not a violation of faith. He added that artistic fiction was not welcome, but craftsmanship was acceptable. He cautiously stated that the usefulness of saving books and people was understandable and reasonable. The people breathed a sigh of relief, although they did not immediately stop whispering. The situation with the cellarer was more complicated. He was taken to the city. He tried to say that he was frightened by the fire and did not mean any harm, but the letters from the manager and the traces of tar spoke for themselves. A rumor spread at the market that the manager had promised a reward for the disappearance of the letters. The Baron sided with his man until he realized that the widow had put up a deposit and was ready to raise the merchant class against unjust taxes. Then the Baron backed down and said through a messenger that he would forgive the monastery if it stopped the lawsuit. The abbot replied that agreements could not be removed from the truth. Otherwise, tomorrow, the bridge would collapse and the mill would become someone else's. The Baron took another step back and replaced the manager. The cellarer admitted his guilt. He was stripped of his position and forced to work on the restoration of the scriptorium without pay and under supervision. He walked around black with soot and remained silent. The bell ringer became more important than ever during those days. Previously, many had laughed at his stooped back and forgetfulness. Now everyone knew that his ringing had raised the people at the very first moment. The abbot called him to the well and said he wanted to give him assistance and better housing. The old man refused the quarters, but agreed to teach 2 boys to ring the bell so that their hearts would beat in the right rhythm. He showed them how to hold the rope, how to listen to the air, how to feel when the stroke should be shorter and when it should be longer, so that the people in the courtyard would understand where to carry the buckets and where the fire was weaker. People stopped laughing and began to respect his firmness. The underestimated man became the leader. Meanwhile, the widow was making her own decisions. She did not ask for loud words. She came to the well when no one was there and just stood next to her son. She told the librarian how she had once searched for her baby, how she had given him to nomads because otherwise they would not have made it to the city, how she had later married, how she had been widowed, and how she had once seen a familiar mark on a ribbon in the hands of strangers at the market. She did not make excuses. She said that now she wanted her son to have a place to stay and a job that would not harm his soul. The pilgrim answered briefly through his actions. He placed simple wooden poles by the well, made gutters, and taught the monastery boys how to draw water so that their backs would not break and their palms would not tear. He did this calmly, without harsh words. The librarian watched him and saw that he had another strength. The pilgrim knew how to read other people's books slowly and respectfully. He did not argue, he checked. He showed the librarian that in one of the old notebooks there was a drawing of a water carrier with bags almost identical to the ones he used. He said that, on the eastern roads, he had seen craftsmen who argued about words, but agreed on actions when it was necessary to save grain from water or fire from grain. The librarian realized that he was not dealing with a rootless vagrant, but with a man who brought reconciliation between craft and word. This was important for the monastery, which had experienced fear and foreign hands in its papers. The boy, whom everyone knew as a kitchen runner, sat down to learn the alphabet. He was given a pen. He stained his fingers, spilled ink, got angry at himself, but did not give up. He began to help the librarian with his copying, and in the evenings he asked the pilgrim to show him leather mugs and belts. Within a month, he was able to assemble a small frame himself and draw water from the well faster than 4 adults with buckets. People were amazed that the boy could count, turn the handle, and remember dates and amounts. The abbot said that status should not interfere with work and made the boy the scribe's assistant. The elders nodded. Stereotypes creaked but gave way. One day, when work was already underway, a man in a simple gray cloak came to the gate. He was carrying a bundle in his hands. He told the gatekeeper that he had brought what had not burned in the fire. The gatekeeper called the librarian. Inside the bundle were sheets of paper that smelled of smoke, but were intact. They were the very letters about the mill with the notes of the ancestors. The man said he had found them in an empty barrel that someone had not had time to take away. He was afraid to bring them right away, and only now had he made up his mind. He did not give his name. The librarian realized that there was not only evil in the world, but also a quiet fear that sometimes leaned toward good. He thanked the man and told the bell ringer to ring the bell softly and gratefully. The bell ringer struck the bell, as few can, quietly but clearly. The ecclesiastical court official sent a note. He wrote that the arson case had been transferred to the city court, that the manager would be fined, and that the cellarer would be allowed to continue working at the monastery under supervision. He also wrote that the water device had been found to be useful and not contrary to the rules. He advised keeping the drawings and records in the library and allowed them to be shown to people at the market if necessary. The abbot gathered the brothers and said that sometimes other people's words are frightening, but more often it is ignorance that is frightening. He admitted that he had been too quick to suspect, and asked that the next time trouble arose, they act as quickly as they had acted that night. The day came when the widow came to the abbot with a request. She said she wanted to give the monastery a wooden canopy for the scriptorium and a new well gate to make work easier. She also asked for a separate corner in the courtyard for travelers, so that they would have a place to warm up. The abbot agreed. He accepted the gift and promised that this corner would be a place of gratitude to all those who helped, not with words, but with deeds. People gathered and saw a simple image appear above the gate, a hand holding a belt and water flowing upward. There were no long speeches under the image. There was a short line saying that old knowledge saves new life. The pilgrim stood nearby and looked at this line. He felt that the road that had led him across the steps had finally found a home where he could not fear the darkness and suspicion of strangers. He knew that the whispers of heresy had not yet disappeared completely. At the fair, there would always be those who said that the new was evil, even if the new was older than the old. But now the whispers were fading, because the monastery held scrolls with drawings. The boy turned the handle as he should, the bell ringer rang clearly, and the widow stood nearby and knew how to pay and remain silent at the right moment. One evening the pilgrim and the librarian were sorting through the books that had been saved. They sorted the pages, dried them on ropes, and laid them out on clean cloth. In one binding, the librarian found a note. It had been written by the former abbot many years ago. The note said that a book is not an invisible idol, but a tool, and that protecting it is a matter of the hands. There was a short note about how, in difficult times, people save each other with simple devices and simple actions. The librarian smiled. He showed the note to the pilgrim. The pilgrim read it and nodded. The whole story they had lived through was summed up in those words. When autumn came and the wind grew harsher, thin smoke hung over the monastery roof from the chimneys. The refectory smelled of bread again.
At noon, the bell ringer rang a soft chime that everyone recognized. The boy wrote more evenly. The widow brought flour and butter not only on holidays, but also on weekdays. The librarian worked more reliably than before, because the fear he had experienced taught him not to store important scrolls in one place. The pilgrim stayed. He did not become a brother, did not take the tonsure, but became a man who was trusted. He was called the widow's son. His name became familiar to the courtyard. If anyone asked what the wooden thing by the well was called, they answered simply, without fancy words, and added that it had once saved the library. Sometimes at the market someone would recall how, immediately after the fire, the pilgrim had been called a heretic. Those who remembered said this without malice. He said that fear makes the tongue heavy and the eyes blind, and that it is good when, on a difficult night, there are not only strong hands nearby, but also a head that remembers old drawings. Peasants from distant places said that after that incident, the monastery shared the drawing with them, and now water flows faster from small wells. The women said that the buckets had become lighter. The children laughed and spun the handle playfully until they were dragged away. The abbot pretended to be angry, but in his heart he was glad, because the noise of animals and people in the yard meant life. One winter, the monastery tested the fire again. A smoker caught fire in the gap between the cells, and the flames licked the straw. This time, no one screamed. The boy was already a young scribe. The bell ringer sounded the alarm without fuss. The pilgrim and 2 students stood by the well, and the straps fell into place. The fire went out so quickly that many did not even have time to be frightened. After this incident, talk of heresy ceased altogether. Instead, a simple truth remained. If a teaching does not interfere with saving lives and books, then it is better to let go of fear. When spring came, the widow proposed another project. She told the abbot that she wanted to open a small school for boys from the surrounding villages near the bridge, so that they could learn to read and write, and also see how the wooden frame at the well worked, and know that intelligence is not the enemy of faith. The abbot agreed. A librarian worked at the school, and on weekends a pilgrim came and showed belts, leather mugs, and simple drawings. He said through the librarian's retelling that hands and minds must work together. People listened because they understood the connection with the recent misfortune. Thus, the melodrama about the found son became a social drama about the rights to water and forest, and then ended with a clear denouement in which everyone got what they deserved.
The cellarer was punished with action, not words. The baron replaced the steward because he had abused his power. The widow got her son back and invested money in the common cause. The boy rose not because of his kinship, but because of his knowledge. The bell ringer ceased to be a laughingstock and became the measure of time for the entire court. The pilgrim, who was called a heretic, turned out to be the guardian of ancient loyalty. He kept the old drawings and wrote new lines in notebooks, not destroying, but connecting. The moral did not sound like a loud lesson. It flowed from choices. When the fire hit the roof, people did not look for a miracle. They took water and went. When suspicion struck a stranger, someone read old books and found the answer there. When the authorities tried to break the law, there were records and those who read them aloud in the courtyard. When the poor man was considered superfluous, he showed his account an eye for measurement, which turned out to be more important than loud titles. And so it happened. Justice did not come out of thin air, but from restrained and firm actions. And everyone who was in the courtyard that night knew that the sound of the bell, the circle of the handle, and the rustle of the sheets on the rope were more important than the whispers of heresy.
The story, which began as a simple misfortune and family loss, went through a fire, and the intentions of strangers turned into a short thriller with barrels and seals, and ended with people learning to keep not only bread and butter, but also their wits. The Pilgrim did not become a saint, but he became an example. His car was no longer called strange. It began to be called necessary, and the word heretic returned to its place in the basket of empty gossip, which is shaken out in the wind when the yard is swept and the books lie with dry feet.